Welcome to Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast with Alexia Leachman, the weekly 9-month podcast to help parents-to-be look forward to their fear-free childbirth. Alexia is a pregnancy and head trash clearance coach and the author of Fear-Free Childbirth, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy and a Positive, Pain-Free Birth. As a mum who's had 2 fear-free and pain-free births, Alexia wants to share with you how she overcame her pregnancy and childbirth fears so that you can look forward to having a fear-free birth too. Over the 9-month life of this podcast, Alexia will be sharing some real-life stories from mums and dads, insights into the latest childbirth research, inspiring tales from birth professionals, and some tips and techniques for clearing your fears and stresses. If you would like to receive a free chapter from her book, then head over to fearfreechildbirth.com, where you can also sign up for her email series, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy. But now, it's time for the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast. This is me, your host, Alexia Leachman. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, on today's show, I'm going to be talking about miscarriages. And I've got a guest on who's going to talk to me about how she works with women to help them move on and get past experiencing a miscarriage in their life. Now, I want to say a special thank you to Amanda. So, Amanda, if you're listening, this is for you. Now, you got in touch with me recently. You're a regular listener of the show, and to tell me the terrible news that you have just experienced a miscarriage. And was there anything I could do here on the podcast to help you? You wanted information, you wanted to find out how to go through this awful, terrible time. And so this show is dedicated to you because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have thought about doing a show on miscarriages. And I can't believe that I hadn't thought about doing a show about miscarriages because it's such a common thing. I myself experienced a miscarriage and it was horrible. It was just horrible. I just felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach. The loss, the numbness, the pain, the emotion, all of it was just so overwhelming for me. And yet miscarriage, even though we don't hear about it a lot, it's not talked about a lot, it's experienced by a lot of women. 1 in 4 women will experience a miscarriage when they're pregnant. So, that is not a tiny amount by any means. That makes it pretty common. And so it's likely that when you're experiencing a miscarriage, that you know people around you that have also been through that. But the interesting thing about miscarriages is we just don't tend to tell people about them. We keep it to ourselves. Many times it happens during our first trimester when we haven't even told people that we're pregnant. And so it becomes a very isolating experience, which can make the pain even more overwhelming. So it can be really very, very difficult. So I hope that today's episode can help you to cope better with finding out that with handling your miscarriage, if this is something that you are going through. And if it isn't something that you've experienced or that you're not going through it, well, maybe there's some things you can learn here during the show that might help you to talk about your pregnancy in a more mindful way, because maybe there are people around you that are currently going through this. And so for people that are experiencing the pain of miscarriage, whether that's 1, 2 or 3 or even more, then, pregnant mums are the worst. There's nothing worse to a lady that's had a miscarriage than another mum who's pregnant. So hopefully if you're in a great place where you've got a lovely pregnancy that's unfolding, then maybe, listen to this and be mindful that there are women out there that are experiencing very dark times because of their own miscarriage. So as I mentioned earlier, I've got today on the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Susie Gower, and Susie Gower specialises in helping women from fertility all the way through birth, but she works a lot with women that have gone through miscarriages. So she's going to be sharing some really great advice and some tips and some tools to help you to handle miscarriage if that is part of what's happened to you. Some of the things that she's going to be sharing with us are, we're going to be talking about the typical emotions that you experience when you're going through finding out that you've had a miscarriage and what comes after that, what that emotional journey looks like. But she's also got some great little exercises or things that you can do to help you to let go and move on and release that emotion. And also then later on in the conversation, we talk about some of the other ways that you can think about your miscarriage that can help you to take a different perspective and think about it in a way that is more helpful, that isn't so painful for you. And hopefully there's going to be some stuff that's going to really help you to move on. We've also got some exercises, some things that you can do as well. And I've got some stuff that I used during my miscarriage that helped me to move on as well, that I'll be sharing as well during the chat. We've got some great downloads. Susie's provided some really great additional tools and stuff as well, and I'm going to be giving away some stuff that's going to be bonus content that you can get as a free download to go with today's episode. And you'll be able to get hold of that along with the show notes for today's episode at fearfreechildbirth.com/miscarriage. So you just need to go there to find out all the juicy details on everything that we're sharing during today's chat, as well as access to the free download that goes with today's episode. So without further ado, here's the time that I spoke to Susie Gower all about how you can better handle the aftermath of finding out that you've had a miscarriage. Well, welcome, Susie, to the Fear Free Childbirth podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you. Absolutely.
Well, today we're going to be talking about miscarriages. And so obviously miscarriages play a huge role in pregnancy and certainly can really contribute to the fear that mums might have during pregnancies and stuff. So this is going to be a really useful episode, I think, to so many people. But before we dive into all that, would you mind just sort of telling us a little bit about who you are and how you came to do the work that you do?
Yes, absolutely. As I say, I'm Susie Gower. I've created my company called Becoming a Mama, and it started before I had my children. My children now are sort of 18 and 20, and sadly I had a miscarriage. And what I felt when I'd had a miscarriage there was nobody there to support me. There was nobody there that you could go for help. There was nowhere. Alternative therapies were just slowly coming in, and so there wasn't anything. So when I left the hospital, I was given this little leaflet to say, these are the emotions you may be feeling. And I remember thinking, I don't feel like that, and just put this leaflet to one side and dutifully went home. And then I had a week off work and I felt okay, and then I decided to go back to work. And when I went back to work, I remember being on the tube and I just burst into tears and I just trembled, and I thought, I can't go back to the office. And it was before mobile phones, so it's like you couldn't contact them. So I ended up going home, and what I realised in that moment was I actually was experiencing grief. And it was like I had to mourn this child that was never there, even though I was 13 weeks pregnant, but sadly the baby had died at 6 weeks. And I had to mourn this child, and it was just the most bizarre feeling ever. And so I felt from that moment on that what I wanted to do when the time was right was to create a mum and baby clinic or a mum and baby support centre that women could go to, where they could share their feelings, maybe have a complementary therapy, but whatever they needed was there to support them, and however they needed it and for what format they needed it in. So hence that's when my company, if you like, that's when I decided to do something, create a clinic purposely for women. And then it's just grown and grown, and so now what I do is support women from fertility through to birth. But for me, it's the emotional journey, because I think the emotional side of life is there, it's present, but it's not acknowledged in the way it should be. And so my emphasis through the treatments, I've done reflexology and Reiki and hypnotherapy, but it's really about the holistic side where I come from. It's the mind-body connection, finding out what's going on with a person, what do we need to do, what do they need to look at, how do they need to be, and it's a journey taking them from one place to another, but at their pace and in their time frame. So that's really my company, if you like. I've created a support group which is in Hertfordshire, so that runs on a monthly basis. I'm a volunteer for the Fertility Network UK. I mentor people, I mentor mamas, and I recently have become an author, meaning I've created a free ebook on the website all about the emotional aspect of boosting your natural fertility and the emotions behind it. Because I think once you understand the emotions, you realise they're normal and they're perfectly natural, and everybody goes through them at some stage during their journey to become a mum. Absolutely.
So just talking about the emotions then, and just, be really interested to just talk a little bit about the emotions that, when you say they are normal, so would you mind just talking a little bit about what are those normal emotions that you're referring to? Because I'm just thinking that, I've got some listeners that have experienced miscarriages and that might not realise that maybe what they're feeling is normal, or so it would be really maybe reassuring to them to hear what those emotions are that you're referring to.
Well, the common feelings are feeling angry. It's not fair. Why me? Sadness. For me, it was very much grief. It was loss. It was a really big loss. I'd lost because I felt it because it wasn't a child. Therefore, I didn't need to grieve. But it was the loss of a baby, a loss of 9 months' time, this due date that you're looking forward to, the loss of planning and the future and holidays, even family events. You were all planned around this date. So loss is a huge term in terms of emotions: frustration, disappointment, anger. They're all emotions that women feel, even down to jealousy and envy, which a lot of people don't want to talk about. If there's somebody in the office that's just suddenly announced their pregnancy, and then you're just slowly getting over a miscarriage and coming to terms with going back to work, and they announce it. And some women, they don't really mean it, but they'll say, oh, well, I wasn't really trying and it just happened. And that can create turmoil and stress at no end within, for women. And so it's understanding that those feelings are normal and they're very, very natural, because everybody goes through them at some stage, much more quickly or at a slower pace. It really varies, and it's a very sensitive time for women.
So if there's a woman that's just recently found out that she's had a miscarriage, then, personally, I've had a miscarriage as well. And I know that, when you get the news in the hospital, it really does, well, for me anyway, it really just hit me like a kick in the stomach. I just felt so empty and numb. And I think I was just in shock for a day, just kind of like computing what I just found out. And like you're saying, it was this, I hadn't known I was pregnant for that long, but this kind of grieving this future, this kind of, you're just already getting your head around being pregnant and all that stuff that hasn't yet happened. So it's a really strange kind of grief and loss, because you're grieving something that doesn't kind of exist in a crazy way, grieving your future and all that kind of stuff, which I think makes it very hard for a lot of other people to understand. But, if you're in the throes of that initial phase of the shock of it, really, what kind of advice would you have for somebody that's at that stage in their miscarriage, in sort of finding out?
I think really it's just about just to be still and just to almost like, sometimes you don't want to accept what's happened, and you're angry and you want to shout and why me and all those sorts of feelings. But I think it's all about actually just focusing on yourself and what do you feel you need. Some people choose to just be really quiet and talk about it just with their partner. Some people have maybe shared it already with their family and immediate friends. And it's important to actually think, what do you want to do? Don't feel like you should do something. Don't feel like you should be pushed and shuffled into doing something else. But it's about, do you need to spend time on your own just digesting, well, this is what's happened. What do I need to do? Some people want to just actually don't talk to people. They just want to almost like go into their shell and just stay at home and not talk. Some people are very much, one client of mine, actually, she was really proactive. She said, look, it's happened, I'm fine with it. I just knew something wasn't quite right. So, and therefore she was ready to move on. She was an exceptional case, but that's how she was. So I think really what I would say is, don't rush into things. Don't think about, this is what I've got to be, this is what I should do. No. Just take stock. Go back home, sit down, chat. If you want to chat, you might not want to chat. You might just feel like you want to go for a swim, or you want to go for a sauna, you want to go to yoga. It's actually just almost like going within and thinking, what do you need at this moment in time that's going to make you feel good?
I think what I would kind of add to that is to kind of face what you're feeling and acknowledge what you're feeling and almost connect to what you're feeling, rather than ignoring it or running away from it or not dealing with it. I think certainly, and I'm only speaking from my own experience, but certainly, one thing I did was I just sat with it, and it was horrible, and I really just I didn't focus on the horrible feeling, but I faced what I was feeling, and I felt it, and I let it move through me, and I felt like, I sobbed for hours and allowed that sobbing to happen without feeling like, pull yourself together, Lex, pull yourself together, come on, you'll be okay. I didn't do any of that. I just literally let it come out and just sat in a mess for goodness how long. And then I started the cloud started lifting a little bit as that emotion comes out. I think you've got to honour that emotion and allow it to just flow through you. And it's when we kind of block it or deny it or don't accept it, that's when it might become harder, or kind of it'll rear its head in a more ugly form later on down the line, potentially,
Absolutely, totally agree with that. For me, it's like if you're at the beach and you have a ball and you're putting the ball under the water and you're keeping this ball under the water nicely, then all of a sudden you take your eye off the ball and that ball wants to come to the surface. It's got to come to the surface. That's how I see the emotion, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is important to do that. And I think great that you could do that so quickly. I see lots of women, it's a process and they have to do it at their pace and their time. But I think ultimately, these feelings do need to surface, and I think you do need to look at them and you do need to digest what it is about, because some women sadly have had maybe 2 or 3 miscarriages, so therefore when they grieve, they're grieving for the first one and the second one because they hadn't actually released those emotions. So it's important to go back and release those emotions too, and find out also, if you really are connected to yourself, you can almost just, like you said, sit quietly and feel where does that stress feel in your body, and allow that stress to surface.
And then one thing I did that I found really helpful for me, I'd just done a course where I'd learned about balancing my chakras. And I felt inspired in that moment when I was going through, when I was kind of clamouring for something that might help me. What can I do? What can I do? And I did this lovely chakra meditation that kind of just where you take each chakra in turn and kind of almost massage it and fill it with positive energy. And I just kind of went with it because I was like, well, anything, I just want to feel better. And I stayed doing that, I think all afternoon or something. And my goodness, it helped me so much. And I'll happily share that exercise that I did to people that might be interested in having that. I'll put that in the podcast show notes. But that, obviously different things are going to work for different people, aren't they? So what kind of things would have you found that work for your clients to help them kind of, if there are particular maybe exercises or thinking patterns or, I don't know, tools that they could use? Is there anything that has worked really well in the past for people that you know?
What's really worked in the past are visualizations. I mean, I absolutely love doing visualizations with people, and they've really worked because sometimes we need to be guided to help move on. And visualizations for me, if you can talk to somebody, and here's the one that I always use a lot, is about a little bird cage. And it's also, you take somebody to a really nice garden and there's a little bird cage there. And what happens is that as people, we don't really generally like to see birds in a cage. So it's about opening the cage and letting that little bird fly free. And that actually is symbolic of letting the baby go, letting the child go, letting the miscarriage go. And that's something that I do within the clinic, and it works incredibly well. But if you're at home, it is about maybe sometimes just writing a list of all the things how you feel. Just write it down. I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel this, I feel that. And creating something like that. Or the other great thing is what you can do is creating something called a farewell ceremony, which is really a very nice thing to do. And it's about gathering all the little things that you have, maybe some scan pictures, or you've maybe bought something, and maybe even write on a piece of paper the due date, but putting everything together and actually just creating a little ceremony where you honour almost what would have happened, honour the date, honour the arrangements that you would have made, honour maybe if you'd have wanted a boy or a girl or the name, honour all that, and then light a candle if you like that sort of thing, say a prayer, and also just to absolutely just create a time and a space where you can just release those emotions at that given time to the child. Okay, that never was for that moment, but you don't know what's going to happen in the future. But at this moment, it's about releasing those emotions that need to help you to move on in life. And also, that's another thing is that I find is women feel guilty that they should let go of this emotion of this baby, and therefore they want to hold on to it for as long as possible. But what I say is you'll never release the memory, but you can release the emotion you attach to this particular memory. And that's what really this is all about, is releasing the emotion so that you can move on when the time is right for you. And it's creating a little ceremony, however you want to do it. And I think we've got some information that we can share with everybody later, how to do it and how to create their own personal ceremony of letting go at their pace, which can be hugely beneficial, hugely.
And I think it's really that point that you made about, separating the emotion out from the memory. I think it's a really important one because a lot of women, they hold on to this stuff because they believe that's, that actually they don't realise you can separate the two, and that they want to hold on, because they just want to hold on to any little thing that might be related to the baby and to remain connected to it. But that is, I think it's important to say you can still do that, but you don't have to hold on to the pain and the associated emotions with it. You can actually release the emotions and still hold on to the memory, so that you can think about all that stuff without needing to cry or having that pain in your heart or wherever it might appear in your own body. You can still have those beautiful memories, the imagination, the things that you're imagining and all that stuff, without having a tear in your eye when you do it. And so I think it's a really good point that you've made that. So thank you for making that point. And so now I want to think about, we've talked a lot about miscarriages that maybe occur early on in pregnancies, but what about those that kind of, a little bit more further on during the pregnancy? Because in my mind, I was in the category where I lost mine, similar to you, in fact. I think my little one didn't make it past 7 or 8 weeks, and I found out when I was 12 weeks. But, when it's in the second trimester, it must be quite different experience for women in that point, because they've really started noticing changes in their body and stuff. And so I suppose in my mind, I'm thinking it must be much harder for women at that stage. Or what's your experience of working with women at that point, and how can they move on if that is them?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of people you see, usually because 12 weeks is the magical number. Yeah. Everybody wants to get to 12 weeks, and then they're so excited they want to share with everybody, which was what I had, because I'd got to 13. So yes, lots of people are then sharing, and then all of a sudden then they have to start saying, well, actually, this wasn't meant to be. And again, it's very traumatic for lots of people, because they've then made plans at work or whatever. But some people find that other people are very reassuring, because what they then realise is miscarriage or pregnancy loss is very, very common, sadly. And so therefore people then are very kind, and they will share their views. And, I've even had a client who was sharing it with their office, and one chap actually went up to her and he said, look, it happened to my wife, and I can sympathise, and if there's anything I can do. And she wasn't expecting that. And it was really, really heart-rending, because they didn't expect a man actually to approach her, because she thought, women feel this, but men do as well. So I would say it is sad, and sadly I've witnessed people who have lost babies 20 weeks and onwards. It's incredibly sad, but I think what is important is that you take the steps slowly and you just walk with it however you want to feel. And going back to what we just said about doing a little ceremony, doing what's right for you. I've even had women who've bought a little box, and they've put everything in this little box, and they've decorated it and painted it, and they've even called the baby a name, what was a fun name for them, and they've put that box somewhere special, so therefore they can take it out whenever they need it. Some people felt the need to bury this little box of all these goodies. Some people have actually thrown it away. It varies. One of the common things that women do is I get them to write a letter to the baby. That's really quite nice, what their hopes were, what they thought was going to happen, and they're really sad that it wasn't meant to be at this stage. And they then, what I always suggest is then burn the letter, so therefore you're releasing it, because it's just another way for women to acknowledge the loss, but to get it out of their bodies.
And there's a couple of things you mentioned there that I wouldn't mind just sort of going back to. There's the thing, first of all, about sort of, telling people at work about your pregnancy. And a lot of us, we wait for the 12-week mark because of this miscarriage risk, and then it drops away. So, in your most difficult trimester, where you're maybe experiencing some of the symptoms of morning sickness and exhaustion and all that, and you don't say, nobody knows what you're going through because you've chosen not to share your pregnancy. Yeah. And then you do once you hit the 12 weeks. But actually, what you've just shown is that, maybe by sharing the pregnancy sooner, because people don't want to share it in case they miscarry, and then they have to then go, not backwards, but let people know that actually it's not happening. But actually, maybe by doing that, they're missing out on potential support from people that have experienced it, that are there for them, because actually this is such a common thing, isn't it? Miscarriages. Well, I don't know what the stats are off the top of my head. Do you know what the stats are for miscarriages?
I think in the last ones I saw was 1 in 4 people.
Which is staggering, isn't it? That's huge. It's almost like not a normal thing, but it's almost like, when you become pregnant, it's kind of, it is sort of not expected, but it's massive. It's not an unusual occurrence to have a miscarriage. And yet certainly when I had a miscarriage, I didn't realise it was such a common thing to happen to women, and that you do feel quite alone. You do feel like nobody else is going through this, but actually there's a lot of people that go through this, and then the guys as well. Let's not forget the guys, that
absolutely.
Dads don't get recognised a lot with the miscarriage challenges, do they? They don't, because they experience loss as well.
They certainly do, and they feel they're there to support their wife, but men don't generally talk to each other. And it's really interesting because I run a fertility support group, and I've been running it for 2 years now, and I purposely created it for women only because women like to share. But within the last few weeks, we've had couples wanting to come, and now the women who come, they want to come now because they're feeling that they're ready now to be heard, their voice to be heard. They want to share how they feel, and it's really very interesting. So you're right, we do need to include the men and the guys in all this because they have emotions too, and it's their role to support the women, but sometimes as women we don't know really what we want, so therefore they're struggling to support us in a way of what do we need. And that's why leading on to support groups, they're fantastic, they're absolutely brilliant. If you can find a support group online or actually physically go is even better, because then you meet people. Like my support group now, they actually meet socially in the month, and they go for coffee with each other. And now their husbands are all going out for a comedy night because they feel they need laughter and fun back in their lives. So it's great. It's creating a community where women can share and feel comfortable sharing how they feel, and that's important. It's really important.
And I'm thinking as well that those people that are really that do sort of continue to struggle, particularly in the face of those people that might, other pregnant women, goddamn, those other women that dare to get pregnant and start flaunting it. Like you mentioned, the ones that go, I weren't really trying and it just happened. And I just think there's so many, and again, maybe those that listen to the podcast that are pregnant, is just to be mindful that when you do talk about your pregnancy, that you just don't know what other people are going through around you, do you? And some people can not be thoughtless, but they kind of share that kind of stuff without realizing that there's somebody else that could just be, they might have just lost their baby and they really can't talk to you, or they really can't even bear the thought of you sharing your news, even though it's wonderful for you. And it's a really delicate, emotional minefield, isn't it, this whole miscarriage and pregnancy, where you've got some women going through complete joy because they found out, and then the next minute either for them it's not going brilliantly, or there's somebody that they know very closely that's going through that challenge too. It's a very difficult area, isn't it?
It is a very difficult area, and I tell you, one of the things I witnessed is Facebook. Facebook, women just will put their scan pictures on Facebook, which is lovely. But of course, usually, girlfriends are all together and they're all experiencing, or usually want to have babies at the same time. And so therefore, a lot of my clients actually have come off Facebook because they can't bear to see another scan picture or another baby announcement. Absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes it's in lots of places, not necessarily just at work, but it's on the social media as well. So therefore, women are becoming more isolated because they're just becoming more insular in that respect. And therefore, it's finding support for them, what they need, so they can feel stronger, they can feel more confident, they can think about maybe trying again when the time is right, and that sort of thing.
I know, because there was somebody that I was working with who had suffered 2 miscarriages, and she couldn't, she couldn't go on, she did, but she found it so difficult just leaving the house in case she saw a pregnant woman, in case she saw a mother with kids, in case, so immediately that's such a huge proportion of the population that would trigger her because of the pain that she was going through. And so I worked with her to try and help her just so that wasn't such a painful thing for her to experience, because you just get reminders all the time of this sort of, this children thing, this pregnancy thing, this baby thing. It's just everywhere. And I know that when certainly for my second pregnancy, I've tried to tone it down a bit on social media, because I was just so aware that there were so many of my friends with fertility stuff going on or miscarriages that I just, didn't really want to kind of put them through that. But I suppose acting alone doesn't really make a difference when there's so many other women that continue to do that on social media. And actually, they're really happy and they want to share it with their friends and family, and so you can't kind of blame them either. But that's what makes this such a difficult one, isn't it?
It's very difficult. It really is very difficult, because on one hand, that these women are very, very excited and want to share their pregnancy, and then there's women sadly are going through this trauma, this difficult time, and it is keeping the balance right, absolutely. But it's important it's important, though, that women, once you have gone through a miscarriage and then you're feeling that you need support, it's actually about taking back the control. And it's about taking back the control that you can look at what you can control in terms of, look, you can control your emotions, you control how you think, but you've got to do these things at the time is right, so you do feel stronger, as you say for your lady, that when she goes out, she's feeling stronger, that the baby thing is not going to affect her. She can buy a birth congratulations card for somebody, things like that. When you start to being able to do that, you know, actually, I'm over this, I'm ready to try again. And it's putting those little pointers in that you know that when you're doing that, I'm ready to move on. But it's like going back to what you say, it's acknowledging that that's how you feel, and it's normal. But it's like slowly you'll get to a point where you think, do you know what, I'm ready to do a bit more work on this, I'm ready to just do some letting go, and then bringing back the control of what you need to do, because a lot of that is they're feeling vulnerable because they can't control their fertility, and therefore other people get pregnant and it's not fair, and I want to be pregnant, and it's like, yeah, that's right, so what can you do to help you to get pregnant? What can you control? What can you look at you that you can make a difference with than what you can't make a difference with? So it's focusing on the positive, not necessarily the negative. Do you see
yeah, absolutely. And a lot of what you're talking about there, when hearing what you're saying, I'm just thinking a lot of that is that inner piece. It's looking at how you're feeling, it's looking at your emotions, it's looking at your own personal triggers, what upsets you, what triggers stuff within you, and really having that kind of, doing that inner work, that kind of facing your own demons and facing your own, taking a good look in the mirror, which is, because that you can control, there are some very good techniques and people that can support you to help you let go of these negative emotions. There's some really great tools now that means you can let go, when your time is right for you, you can let go of those negative emotions really quite quickly if that's what you want, and when you feel able to do that. But you can't do that unless you acknowledge that there is something there to let go of, and that you are looking inward like that. And sometimes that looking inward journey is what scares people, isn't it? Because sometimes they've got other stuff that they don't want to face up to, or they don't want to touch because it's painful. But often, certainly from my own experience, I had my fair few of painful, horrid experiences, and I've found now that when I have one of those, I just dive straight in and just go straight for the inner work, because I know that's going to be, it might be sort of difficult in the short term to face up to it, because it's not easy doing that kind of work. But my goodness, it just means I can let go of that stuff much quicker, and I'm not carrying it around and having it thrown back in my face by triggers that are existing everywhere in life, by situations that are happening around me that I can't control. So the best thing I felt that I could do was to do that work so that I could control what's going on inside, and that's certainly been something that I'm very grateful that I was able to do that. And I'd have certainly urged people to consider doing that inner work as a first port of call, really, because that's where you're going to get a lot of that release and find the peace eventually much quicker, I think.
Absolutely, totally agree, because we all have stuff, emotions that we suppress. We all have that, and we just suppress it, throw it to one side and move on and carry on. And then when something like a miscarriage happens, therefore you do become upset. But sometimes if it's still continuing over more weeks than you think it should, then usually, like you say, there is something underlying, there's something else that you need to look at. And therefore it's about unpicking your personality, your history, what's going on, what's happened. There may be sadly a death of a family member, or a difficult relationship with a mum or a parent, and so therefore sometimes there can be, if you can say, a positive can come out of it that is actually showing you that actually there is an aspect of your life that you haven't actually really looked at properly that you need to clear. And this often happens with my clients, is that I feel that I'm sometimes just unpick the surface. What's all that about? When did that happen? How old were you when that happened? What was that feeling about? And therefore it can bring a huge relief, like you say, so therefore you can release this hidden emotion that actually you're just storing away. You don't need it. So it's time to let it go, because ultimately you want to be as light as possible. You don't want to have this heavy backpack with emotions on your back that you're carrying with you wherever you go every day. And it's time to just let it go, release it. Isn't it?
Absolutely. And just again, what something you just said just got to reminded me as well. One thing I've learnt through all my own personal traumas and tragedies and everything is that you always try and look for the positive in what's happened. And certainly for me, when I think about my own miscarriage, the real positive for me that came out of that was that, you know, even though I've been in a long-term relationship and I was pregnant, we hadn't specifically planned that pregnancy, even though we wanted kids. It wasn't sort of a deliberate, you know, checking the my sort of cycle and all that, you know, there wasn't any of that going on. But in one sense, we weren't really ready for that, and it kind of jolted us into parent mode, into, okay, do you want this or don't you want this kind of thing. And then when we lost the baby, it was just heartbreaking, just heart-wrenching. But it made us realise exactly how much we did want a child. And we never really had both talked about it to that level. We haven't really communicated that much between us up until that point. And it was really, if it wasn't for that experience of the miscarriage, then we needed that to get us aligned, to get us into into wanting kids properly in an open way. And I think, you know, sometimes that first miscarriage is almost like that jolt for couples to get with the program, guys. You're going to be parents, you know, kind of that kind of like, it could be that. And then after that, we were ready, we were open, we were up for it. It was kind of, we'd made room in our lives for it. We were kind of adapting. And whereas up until that point, we were carrying on being these kind of young single, you know, not single, but young, free and whatever, without sort of thinking about the life that is being parents with kids kind of thing. And so I was really grateful. I changed my perspective on that miscarriage to being, I'm so grateful I had that experience because it allowed me to prepare my life and to make room for a baby, as opposed to sort of this bolt-on baby that kind of had to just attach itself to this life that really wasn't built for it. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute perfect sense, because the thing is, you know, it's lovely, you know, you get to a point in your life that you're ready for a baby, body's telling you ready for a baby, hormones, you know, you've got everything in place. And then sometimes it's a case of when baby turns up, like miscarriage, it just makes you think, do I really want it? I've had lots of women that have said, oh my God, I was really worried, I was really frightened, it really scared me, and all this. And then once sadly the miscarriage had happened, then they realise that actually, like you said, that's what I really wanted. And then they've put things in place. I even had one couple where they actually went to Australia. They decided that actually they weren't ready to be parents. They wanted to go to Australia. So they took a year out and just toured all Australia and then came back. And they said they would be better parents because of it. And therefore that's what they needed. I mean, my own experience was very much that I felt alone. I felt nobody was there. I think there was no support. So it was one of those things that, you know, when the time was right for me, I'm going to be able to support other women going through this so that there is help, there is advice, there is what they need. Because it's about doing it at your pace, isn't it? Like you say, that it made you ready to embrace this baby, embrace your lifestyle. No more wild parties, or they would be more organised wild parties.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that's what it's about. It's just a huge physical, but also a mindset viewpoint to look at, because I think we don't realise the emotional aspect and how it's going to impact on our lives, which is very important to look at.
And I think trying to sort of change that perspective and find other ways of thinking about your miscarriage could potentially be quite helpful to help you move on. And one thing that I've been immersing myself in lots of really interesting books around birth recently, and one thing I've become aware of is there's lots of research around the use of hypnosis and regression therapy to find out what the memories of people have when they were born, and even there are memories dating back to conception. And some people report even being very aware whether their parents wanted them or not, and whether they were conceived in love or conceived on a drunken night out or conceived, you know, how they were conceived. And some babies, you know, in these hypnosis sessions in this book I've read, have even sort of reported that they came here just to jolt the parents into kind of waking up, as it were, and then they went, and that's kind of they chose to just be there for a short period of time to just wake the parents up. And then they wanted to come back when the parents are ready. And I find that a really nice way of thinking about a miscarriage, that it's not to do with the mum. It's not because she went running too much or that she had that glass of wine and that's why she's miscarried. But actually that the baby said, hey, I'm not ready. I'm going to come back when I'm ready and you guys are ready. It's all okay, you know. And sometimes we need to go through that bit of pain or wake up or whatever it is, challenge to come through the other end and do it properly. And that's a nice way of thinking about it, and that's certainly helped me, I think.
It's a lovely way of thinking about it, because I've done lots of research on this too, and one of the things I always wanted to know was, when does conception happen? Does conception happen when, so more of a spiritual, when the soul enters the relationship, enters the body? Is it a conception? Or I've got friends who are very spiritual and they say no, it's actually at the birthing process. And it's like, I just wanted to know. And my journey for this quest has taken me to New York, in the place called Omega, just north of New York, in 2009, and I met this fabulous guy called Dr. Brian Weiss. I'm sure you've maybe.
I love Brian Weiss. So his books, like Many Lives, Many Masters, is one of them, and then what's the other one that's really, really good? That he One Life, Many Life. No, one, I can't remember. Yes, I'll share the links in the show notes, because this guy is amazing. But yes, Karen, I'm so jealous that you've met him. Go on, carry on. He's
fantastic. Well, I'll make you more jealous now. Right, some of my his latest book was Miracles Do Happen, and actually he's written one of my case studies in his latest book.
Oh wow!
it's well, that's all about breech babies, but that's probably for another day. But it's so interesting. And one of the questions I posed to him was, when does conception happen? How does it actually work spiritually? And his analogy was, or through his work, his many years of experience said, was when a couple get together and the actual physical conception actually happens, the soul of a child then resonates or makes a reservation with the mum and dad. He referred it to a bit like a hotel. When you go to a hotel, you make a reservation, you reserve the place, and then you confirm it later. And then what he said was, the child makes the reservation, and then if for any reason the child decides that it isn't right, mum and dad need a little bit of learning, like you said for yourself, for whatever reasons, or mum and dad the relationship isn't quite right, or what, they need to look at that a little bit more, the child then decides to sort of cancel the reservation, and therefore takes away, and that sometimes is the miscarriage.
Right.
And then therefore, he in his words was, so therefore the reservation is now cancelled or terminated, whatever word you want to choose. So then the physical miscarriage then takes place. And he says it's done because sometimes the child just needs to reassure, there's a message there, and if there is a positivity that can come out of it, that would be really beneficial. And here, I'll give you an example of that. Lovely client of mine has been trying for a baby for ages, and we've done lots of things, and we've now decided to go down the spiritual route, down the regression route, and looking back. And what actually happened, what we needed to do was we had to go back when she was actually only 8 weeks old in her mummy's tummy. Wow. And she was a twin. And what it was, the twin had come in, and the twin had sadly died, and mum had miscarried the twin. But the message that came back was that the twin had come to help her through the first 8 weeks, because she didn't want to be lonely. And when she was fine, the twin then decided just to take their energy away and just slowly disappear, because she would be fine.
Oh, wow.
And it was really interesting, because in how she's been now, her words always were me, I feel lonely, I feel alone, it's not happening, why is it not happening? And so going back on that vibration of feeling lonely was where we were led to this, to her being in her own mum's tummy at 8 weeks.
Wow. Isn't
fascinating.
So fascinating. There's a brilliant book I've been reading called by a guy called David Chamberlain, which I'm sure you've heard of. He's done some brilliant research, and again, I'll share this book. This book I've got here, I think it's the 1970s book. Whenever they talk about some of the stories, and they refers to microfiches and things like that, so it really is quite an old book. There's lots of, it's called Babies Remember Birth, and it's fascinating. So again, I'll share the link to that book and then the updated version of that if anybody wants to read more about this kind of fascinating area of what babies remember, certainly from their time in the womb. And I did hint at some of this in a previous podcast episode as well, that I'll put a link to as well in the show notes. So I mean, this is really, really interesting, the idea of how we can think about that miscarriage experience in a different way to help us move on. And I think the idea of babies making a reservation is just such, it lightens it as well, doesn't it? It just kind of takes away that heavy emotional stuff away from it, and enables maybe mums to think about that in a more, I don't know, to kind of move on in it and think about it in a positive way for themselves, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it just, everybody has a different viewpoint spiritually and different thought process of where they are in life, absolutely. But this gives certain people more hope that actually, like you said earlier, they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't have that extra glass of wine, or they overindulged, or they had that little prawn and they shouldn't have really eaten prawns, or something like that.
Yeah.
It just actually brings into perspective, and I think that's what this is all about, is bringing everything back to be in perspective, that sadly this has happened, but maybe it's not you, it's just something other than you, and that we're trying to give everybody just a different viewpoint, just so that it gives you comfort, some peace, some help on whatever level you feel you are, emotionally.
And to ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What's the learning? What is the positive out of this situation? How am I going to be able to take this forward in a way that's going to be serving me and helping me and potentially helping others? I mean, your experience has led to you, it's created a whole body of work for yourself, and now you're supporting lots of other people. So my goodness, the positive that came out of your experience is just phenomenal. And so, when we're going through those dark days, there's always something positive that can come out of it, but we have to be open to that and look for it, and almost kind of be okay with owning that part of our story, because it's nothing to be ashamed of. Stuff does happen to people, and it's okay. It is okay, and it might be difficult, it might be challenging, but you're going to be able to get through it, and things will feel better. And it is back to that old chestnut, isn't it? Time will always help you to heal, won't it, with things like this?
Absolutely, it is an old chestnut, but time is a true healer. It really is, and it's about digesting it at your pace and just working through it and finding what do you need. As we keep saying, what is it do you need, and what can you help yourself? What can you control? And is there something other than this? Is there something subliminal emotion that you're not looking at, not dealing with? Is it the job that you're doing this job and you don't really want to do this job, you don't really like it, and you really want to go and do something else? Maybe it's just giving you that time in life that you just need to review things and rebalance life and look at things a bit more in a different light. Absolutely.
Well, this has been a fascinating chat, Susie. It really, really has. And I'm just thinking, is there anything else that we might need to mention that we haven't mentioned that you think could be really helpful to mums going through this, or even those that may be just fearful of miscarriage?
I think there's two things there. I think if you've sadly had a miscarriage, I hope that this is giving you some food for thought, for thinking that it's, what you're going through is, sadly, it's normal, and however you feel, it's about working through it at your own pace. And if you become pregnant since you have had a miscarriage, just take it step by step. Just because it's happened once doesn't mean it's going to happen again. And it's all have a different mindset. And, what I love to do with my clients is give women mantras, and I think a great mantra is obviously to be kind to yourself, but just have the mantra, I'm doing everything I can. Just have the mantra, I'm doing everything I can, because sometimes we need things just to help us through the day. Just that little bit of positivity. Here's a few little tips that you can do. One is pin a picture of your favourite holiday on the fridge. Something that's really fun and on the fridge, or even take a picture and put it framed on your desk at work. Something that's going to keep you thinking positively all the time. Sometimes if you're feeling a bit down, you look across this lovely picture there, it's just going to lift you for that moment. Absolutely. And the other thing I was going to say is things like, if you're in a meeting and you're feeling down, think of happy places. We all have done those. You just think of a happy place. Just think of being at a beach, being at home. It's almost like taking back the control over your emotions. You don't let your emotions run away with you, but almost like bring them back, rein them in, and think of a happy place, think of things. It's about constantly helping you to feel positive, so that if you're at work, then you go home and then you can deal with it in a private, secure, safe place. You can deal with your emotions. And the other thing I would say is breathing. If you're in a situation you're feeling out of control, you're feeling upset, you're feeling anxious, think about, just take your thoughts to your breathing. Just breathe really deeply. Just, breathe in really slowly and breathe out. And as you breathe out, just let your emotions go, let the worries go. Because having something that's quick and easy, 10 seconds sort of little coping strategy is going to get you over that emotional hurdle at that given moment. So when you've got time, then you can go and deal with it and look at it more positively and recognise what you need to do. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for that, Susie. And also, you did mention early on during our chat about the little ceremony that people can do to help to say goodbye. And so we're going to be offering that. You've sort of written that out for people, haven't you? So if they want to do that for themselves, then we've got that as a free download to go with this episode. So you can find that download at fearfreechildbirth.com/miscarriage. And that there'll be also, and I'm also going to share the chakra exercise that I did for myself that really helped me. So I'm going to share that as well. So and then if there's and also all the books that we've mentioned today, there's the Brian Weiss stuff, there's the Babies Remembering Birth. So all the stuff that we've talked about, I'll be mentioning all that in the podcast show notes, and there'll be some good downloads for you as well to help you if this is where you're at in your pregnancy. So thank you, Susie, for sharing all this great stuff today. Now, if anybody wants to check out, follow you online and see more about your work, where can they find you online?
You can find me at my website is www.becomingamama.com. There's a free ebook there if you want to download. It's all about natural fertility, how to boost your emotions, how to ease stress. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook. Come and join me over there. Come and put a comment. Let us know how you felt about this podcast. It'd be lovely to hear from you. And also on the website there, I have a facility that if you feel that you want a 30-minute sort of discovery call, a clarity call, that how I can help you, by all means, connect with me through that, and I'll happily chat with you over that if you want to have some further advice. More than happy to do that. As I say, it's becomingamama.com.
Thank you very much, Susie. And I'll have all those links on the podcast show notes, so you'll be able to find everything on the notes at /miscarriage for today's episode. Well, thank you once again, Susie, for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been lovely. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for sharing.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that chat that I had with Susie. I'm sure you'll agree there's so much fascinating stuff that Susie shared with us, and particularly that stuff towards the end in terms of helping you to think differently about your miscarriage and the things that you can learn or what the positives are, I think can be really helpful. Certainly when I decided to change my perspective around my miscarriage, that really, really helped me. So I hope that that's something that can help you too. Now, just a reminder, if you want to get hold of those goodies that we're giving away as part of the bonus content that goes with today's episode, then you can get hold of that at fearfreechildbirth.com/miscarriage. Susie's provided the ceremony, the releasing ceremony. I'm giving away the chakra exercise, or the balancing chakra exercise, that helps you to sort of release some of that emotion as well. So some really useful things there to help you to move on and heal from the pain of your miscarriage. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in. You've just been listening to Alexia Leachman from the Fear Free Childbirth podcast. If you enjoyed the show, she'd really love it if you left a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or shared it with a friend. And don't forget, to get a free chapter from her book, head over to fearfreechildbirth.com to get your copy, as well as finding other episodes in this podcast and more about how Alexia can help you with pregnancy and birth preparation coaching. Until next time.